Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News, and I'm Fiza Jamal bringing you our main stories in detail. Pakistan says India is in a state of panic after its illegal accession of occupied Kashmir. Foreign Office spokesperson Dr. Mohammad Faisal has said India's lockdown has turned Kashmir into world's largest prison. India illegally abrogated Article 370, stripping the occupied valley of its special status. In a press brief in Islamabad, the spokesperson said Kashmir is not India's internal matter, but a UN-recognized disputed territory. The spokesperson said Pakistan is considering taking the matter to the International Court of Justice. Faisal said misogynistic messages about Kashmiri girls by Indians on social media are despicable. He said Pakistan knew about New Delhi's move and approached the UN and other global bodies on August 1st and 3rd. The Foreign Office spokesperson said Pakistan will continue building the Kartarpur corridor. New Delhi's communications blackout and security clampdown in the occupied Kashmir have been challenged in the Indian Supreme Court. An activist of the opposition Congress has filed a petition in the country's top court as India's crushing lockdown enters its 4th day. Life in the valley has been paralyzed with a ban on all communication channels, including landlines, mobile networks, and internet. Over 800,000 Indian troops have arrested more than 500 Kashmiris over past 4 days. There are reports of multiple martyrdoms as occupying troops snub protests rejecting India's illegal accession of the valley. Chinese Ambassador Yao Qing has said Beijing opposes India's unilateral change in the status of occupied Kashmir. Talking to media in Islamabad, Qing said New Delhi must respect UN resolutions and international norms concerning Kashmir. The Chinese envoy hoped Pakistan and India will act responsibly for the sake of peace and people of Kashmir. The statement comes after India illegally stripped the occupied valley of its special status after scrapping Article 370. Moving on, U.S. immigration officials have arrested 680 undocumented migrant workers in the southern state of Mississippi. The raids on meat processing plants are the largest workplace stings in a decade. Meanwhile, the U.S.'s top diplomat for Latin America, Kimberly Breyer, resigned amid internal disputes over immigration policy. Well, now it's time for us to take a short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back after the break. We'll continue with our main stories in detail. Amnesty International has issued a travel warning for visitors to the United States. This comes after a weekend of mass shootings in the U.S. that left 31 people dead. Amnesty warned travelers that the U.S. does not adequately protect people's rights to be safe, regardless of who they might be. It said the U.S. gun violence has become so prevalent it amounts to a human rights crisis. The global human rights movement says people in the U.S. cannot reasonably expect to be free from harm. The movement says it is impossible to guarantee not being shot in any part of the United States. The Venezuelan government has abandoned talks with the opposition in protest against fresh U.S. sanctions. The Information Ministry says President Nicolas Maduro has ordered his officials not to travel to Barbados for talks starting today. The ministry says the decision was made due to the grave and brutal aggression being continuously carried out by Washington. It says opposition leader Juan Guaido celebrated and promoted actions harmful to national sovereignty. This comes after President Donald Trump seized all Venezuelan government assets in the U.S. Washington also threatened it would impose sanctions on any Americans doing business with Caracas. 3 people have been killed and 10 injured in Yemen during clashes between Presidential Guard forces and UAE-backed separatists in Aden. The violence highlights a rift within the Saudi UAE-led coalition battling the Houthi rebel movement since 2015. The coalition and the government of President Abd Mansour Hadi are united against the Houthis but have rival agendas for Yemen's future. The United Nations has called for de-escalation after a surge in violence in the port city. Meanwhile, discussing regional challenges in the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo thanked Saudi Arabia for its support in Yemen. United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen Martin Griffiths has expressed alarm over the escalation in Aden. In a tweet, he said the violence will contribute to instability and suffering in the southern port city. Griffiths has called on the parties involved in the conflict to abandon violence and engage in dialogue to resolve differences. He also urged authorities to de-escalate the situation and ensure civilian safety. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has discussed maritime security and Iran with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The U.S. State Department says both discussed stronger maritime security for the freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf. The statement also said Iran's destabilizing activities were also discussed among other bilateral and regional issues. This comes amid heightened tensions in Persian Gulf over 2015 nuclear deal and oil tanker seizures by Iran and Britain. The Syrian government has said the US-Turkey deal over northeastern Syria is a blatant attack on the country's sovereignty. Damascus says the American-Turkish partnership to manage northern Syria is a dangerous escalation in the region. This comes a day after Washington and Ankara agreed to set up a joint operations center in Turkey for a planned safe zone in Syria. Turkey and the United States were deadlocked for months over the scope and command of the safe zone. Earlier, Washington and Ankara had agreed to set up a joint operations center in Turkey to manage a planned safe zone in northern Syria. After 3 days of talks in Ankara, the two countries said the safe zone will be a peace corridor. The agreement was announced by Turkey's defense ministry and the U.S. Embassy in Ankara. The U.S. says it will keep Sudan on its list of countries that sponsor terrorism. The U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs David Hale visited Khartoum and met with the military and civilian leadership. Hale says the U.S. needs to resolve long-standing issues with the country before it can consider removing it from the list. Hale pledged Washington's commitment to peace and security in the country.
The fact is that Sudan remains designated as a state sponsor. That remains in effect. There are a number of things we're looking forward to engaging in a civilian-led government. The issues that before us include the promotion of human rights and religious freedom, counterterrorism efforts.
And the U.S. has raised a travel warning for Hong Kong, urging visitors to exercise increased caution. Hong Kong has been rocked by months of protests that began in response to a now suspended extradition law. The protests have evolved into a direct challenge to the government amid calls for full democracy. The U.S. Consulate General Hong Kong Advisory says demonstrations have spilled over into banned areas. More protests are planned across the city this weekend. Australia has also warned its travelers against visiting the territory in an updated advisory. Earlier, Beijing criticized the US and UK for getting involved in its domestic matters. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have said the US attacks on civilians have raised a cloud of doubt about an unexpected troops withdrawal deal. Taliban leader Mullah Haibatullah Akhundzada said increased US bombings is disrupting the ongoing peace process. Akhundzada said bilateral trust is the foundation of a successful negotiations process. Therefore, it is imperative that such negative actions are ceased. The Taliban said Wednesday's bomb in Kabul was a response to daily attacks by government forces. And now we'll take another short break, but don't go anywhere because the main stories will continue.